The rain fell in torrents, drowning the city in a symphony of droplets. Aiden stood at the edge of the street, soaked to the bone, watching the world move on without him. Then, like a fragment of fate, she appeared, her silhouette framed by the glow of neon lights, an umbrella shielding her from the storm. Their eyes met. A second too long, a heartbeat too fast. And just like that, the world shifted. Chapter 1, The Rain That Started It All. The city pulsed with restless energy, streets slick with the night's relentless downpour. Aiden hated the rain. It reminded him of everything he had lost, of stories left unfinished. He was a writer without words, a dreamer without dreams. He tightened his jacket around himself and ducked into a small alley, hoping to find shelter. That's when he saw her. She was standing beneath a flickering street lamp, completely still, watching the rain as if she were waiting for something, someone. Her fingers clutched the handle of an umbrella, but she made no move to open it. It was as if she wanted to feel the rain. Aiden was drawn to her. Maybe it was the way her eyes held a quiet sadness or the way she carried herself like she belonged to another time, another place. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to him, startled. A soft laugh escaped her lips. Most people wouldn't call a storm beautiful. He shrugged, stepping closer. Most people don't see the poetry in it. She studied him for a moment before holding out her umbrella. "You look like you could use this more than I do." He hesitated, then took it, their fingers brushing, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a shiver down his spine. "What's your name?" he asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Evelyn." Then, before he could say another word, she turned and disappeared into the night. Aiden stood there, holding her umbrella, his heart pounding with the unshakable feeling that he had just met someone who would change his life forever. Chapter 2, A Second Chance. Aiden couldn't shake the memory of her. The way her voice carried an unspoken sadness, the way she disappeared into the night as if she were never meant to be found. He had held on to her umbrella for days, convincing himself it was just another fleeting encounter, a passing moment that meant nothing. But deep down, he knew better. On a quiet evening, he found himself walking through the heart of the city, lost in thought. The neon lights blurred together, the air thick with the scent of rain that had long since passed. He needed inspiration, something to reignite the fire that had once fueled his writing. Then, as if the universe had been waiting for him to notice, he heard it. A melody. Soft, haunting, and impossibly familiar. It drifted through the open doors of a dimly lit cafe, wrapping around him like a whisper from the past. Aiden stopped. His heart pounded. He stepped inside, the warm glow of the cafe contrasting the chill in his bones. And there she was. Evelyn sat at an old piano near the corner, her fingers gliding over the keys with effortless grace. The music she played wasn't perfect, it was raw, uncertain, yet beautiful in a way that made the world slow down. Aiden didn't move. He barely breathed. When the last note faded into the hum of quiet conversations, Evelyn exhaled softly, as if she had just let go of a secret she had been holding for too long. Aiden took a step forward. And then another. She looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something else, surprise, hesitation, and maybe a hint of relief. "You," she whispered. Aiden smiled. "Me." A brief silence stretched between them before she let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "I was beginning to think you'd never find me again." He leaned against the piano, studying her. "I didn't think I would." Evelyn glanced at the umbrella he was holding. "You kept it?" He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Figured I'd return it. Seemed like a waste to let fate's work go unfinished." She laughed again, but this time, it reached her eyes. They sat together, lost in conversation for hours. She told him about her love for music, how she played at the cafe when she needed an escape. He told her about his writing, about the stories he hadn't finished because something always felt missing. When the cafe owner signaled closing time, Aiden realized he wasn't ready to say goodbye. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "I'd like that." They stepped into the cool night air, the city alive around them. For the first time in a long time, Aiden felt something unfamiliar, hope. But as they walked, Evelyn's expression shifted. There was a weight in her eyes, a secret she wasn't ready to share. And Aiden, though captivated by her presence, couldn't shake the feeling that something about this was too perfect. Too fragile. As if she were slipping through his fingers even as he held on to her. Chapter 3, The First Date and the Unspoken Fear. The next evening, Aiden found himself standing outside a quiet little bookstore, his heart pounding harder than it should have. Evelyn had agreed to meet him here, just a casual outing, she had called it. But he knew better. This wasn't just an ordinary evening. When she arrived, she was wearing a deep blue dress, simple yet elegant, her hair tied loosely as if she hadn't put too much thought into it. But Aiden noticed everything, the way she nervously tucked a strand behind her ear, the way her eyes lit up when she saw him. "You're early," she teased, stopping in front of him. "I was afraid you'd change your mind," he admitted. She gave him a small, knowing smile. "And miss this?" "Not a chance." The bookstore was small, lined with towering shelves that carried the scent of old pages and forgotten stories. Aiden watched as Evelyn ran her fingers across the spines of books, pausing every now and then as if searching for something. "Do you read?" he asked, stepping beside her. "Not as much as I used to," she said softly. "Why?" She hesitated. Life got in the way. There it was again, that quiet sadness lurking beneath her words, the weight of something unspoken. Aiden wanted to ask, but he held back. Instead, he picked up a random book and handed it to her. "Then let's start now." Evelyn laughed, flipping through the pages. "Are you always this persistent?" "Only when it matters." They spent the evening wandering between shelves, getting lost in stories, sharing pieces of their own lives in between. He told her about the first story he ever wrote, how he had spent hours trying to put words to a feeling he couldn't explain. She told him about the first time she played the piano in front of a crowd, the fear and exhilaration tangled together. At some point, without realizing it, their hands brushed. Neither of them pulled away. After leaving the bookstore, they found a small diner nearby, the kind that played old jazz records and served coffee that was too strong. They talked for hours, and Aiden found himself memorizing everything about her, the way she spoke, the way she laughed, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't noticing. But just when he thought he was beginning to understand her, something changed. Her phone buzzed. Evelyn glanced at the screen, and all the light in her eyes dimmed. She let out a breath, long and quiet, before setting the phone down without answering. Aiden noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she suddenly looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. "Everything okay?" he asked carefully. Evelyn forced a smile. "Yeah. Just, family stuff." He didn't press her, even though every instinct told him there was more to it. Instead, he reached across the table, his fingers lightly brushing hers. "You don't have to tell me. But if you ever want to, I'm here." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, it seemed like she might say something. But then she exhaled, nodded, and changed the subject. Aiden let it go, for now. As he walked her home, the city was quieter, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. When they reached her building, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I had a good time tonight," she said. "Me too." She hesitated, then leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Aiden felt his breath catch. "Good night, Aiden." And just like that, she disappeared into the building, leaving him standing there, heart racing, mind full of questions. Because no matter how perfect the night had been, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling her away from him. Something she wasn't ready to tell him. And something told him that when she finally did, it would change everything. Chapter 4, A Glimpse of the Truth. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and unspoken words. Aidan and Evelyn met almost every evening, sometimes at the cafe where she played the piano, sometimes at the bookstore where they got lost between pages, and sometimes just walking through the city, their conversation stretching into the night. It felt easy. Natural. But beneath the laughter and soft touches, Aidan could sense something shifting. Evelyn was holding something back. There were moments, fleeting but undeniable, where her mind seemed elsewhere. Her phone would buzz, and she would tense up before silencing it. Sometimes she would space out, staring into the distance as if lost in memories she wasn't ready to share. Aidan wanted to ask. He wanted to tell her that whatever it was, she didn't have to carry it alone. But he was afraid. Afraid that if he pushed too hard, she would slip through his fingers before he even had the chance to hold on. And then, one night, everything changed. They had been walking through the park, a quiet place nestled away from the noise of the city. Evelyn had seemed lighter than usual, laughing at one of Aidan's terrible jokes, the sound of it warming his chest. But then she stopped. Aidan turned to her, confused, until he saw what had stolen the laughter from her lips. A man stood at the entrance of the park, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath the dim glow of the street lamp. He wasn't moving, wasn't calling out to her, but Evelyn had gone pale, her fingers clutching Aidan's arm as if she were bracing herself for something inevitable. Aidan's entire body tensed. Evelyn. She exhaled slowly, her grip tightening. I need to go. She turned on her heel and started walking away. Not running, but moving with a quiet urgency that sent ice through Aidan's veins. The man didn't follow her. He simply stood there, watching. Aidan had two choices, let her walk away again, or finally demand the truth. He chose the latter. He caught up to her in a few strides, stepping in front of her. Evelyn, wait. Who was that? She shook her head. It's nothing. That wasn't nothing, he said firmly. You looked like you saw a ghost. Evelyn swallowed hard, her gaze darting back toward the man. He was gone now, but the fear in her eyes remained. Aidan took her hands, his voice softer now. Talk to me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I wish I could. Aidan's heart clenched. She wanted to tell him. He could see it in the way she was struggling, the way she was on the edge of letting him in. But something, someone, was holding her back. And as much as it killed him, he knew he couldn't force her. So he nodded, forcing a small smile. Okay. Evelyn's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. She hesitated, then reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek in the softest of touches. You make me feel safe, Aidan. That means more than you know. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Aidan standing there, watching her disappear into the night. But this time, he wasn't just left with questions. This time, he was left with the chilling realization that whatever Evelyn was running from, it was catching up to her. Chapter 5, Shadows from the Past. Aidan couldn't shake the image of Evelyn's fear-stricken face. The way she had gone pale at the sight of that man in the park, it haunted him. He wanted to believe it was nothing, but his gut told him otherwise. And so, for the first time since meeting her, doubt crept in. Who was she running from? That night, he barely slept. His mind kept replaying the moment over and over, searching for clues in her expression, in the way her voice wavered when she said she wished she could tell him. By morning, he had made up his mind. He needed to find out the truth. Evelyn hadn't answered his texts all day. Not that she was ignoring him, she had responded with short, vague messages, assuring him she was fine. But Aiden could read between the lines. She was pulling away. And he wasn't about to let that happen. So, that evening, he went to the one place he knew he could find her, the cafe. When he arrived, she was sitting at the piano, playing softly. But her usual ease was gone. Her fingers trembled slightly over the keys, her posture stiff. She was lost in thought, unaware of the world around her. Aiden walked up slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Evelyn." She flinched. The music stopped. When she turned to look at him, something flickered in her eyes, relief, followed by guilt. "Aiden. I didn't think you'd come tonight." He sat beside her, his gaze never leaving hers. "Of course I did." She sighed, looking down at her hands. "You're worried." "Should I be?" Evelyn hesitated, and for a moment, he thought she would shut him out again. But then she surprised him. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered. Aiden's heart pounded. She swallowed hard, as if forcing herself to find the words. "That man you saw. He's not just someone from my past." Aiden waited, barely breathing. "He's my fiancé." The word hit Aiden like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. But the pain in her eyes told him otherwise. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. "Fiancé?" Evelyn nodded slowly, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "His name is Daniel. We were engaged for over a year." Aiden struggled to process what she was saying. "Were?" She exhaled shakily. "I left him." Silence stretched between them. Aiden clenched his fists, his thoughts tangled in confusion and anger. Did he stopped himself, but Evelyn seemed to understand the unspoken question. "He wasn't kind," she admitted. "At first, he was charming, thoughtful. But then he changed. Or maybe he was always that way, and I just didn't see it. He became controlling. Possessive. It was like I belonged to him, like I was something he could own." Aiden's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" Evelyn looked away. "Not physically. But, he didn't have to. He knew how to make me feel trapped in other ways." Aiden felt a slow, burning anger rise in his chest. He had suspected Evelyn was running from something, but he hadn't expected this. She took a deep breath. "I finally left 6 months ago. I thought I was free. But then, he found me." Aiden's grip on the edge of the piano tightened. "Is he stalking you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe. He hasn't tried to contact me." "Not yet. But I know him, Aiden. He doesn't let go easily." Aiden ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. But how could he promise that when he didn't even know what Daniel was capable of? Instead, he reached out and took her hands in his. "You're not alone in this," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." Evelyn's eyes filled with emotion, but she shook her head. "I don't want you getting involved. You don't know what he's like." "I don't care." She opened her mouth to argue, but Aiden wasn't having it. "You don't get to push me away, Evelyn," he said, his voice steady. "Not after everything. I care about you. And if this guy thinks he can just walk back into your life and scare you into silence, he's wrong." Evelyn looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long moment, she let out a breath. "Okay," she whispered. Aiden squeezed her hands. She was finally letting him in. But neither of them knew that Daniel wasn't just lurking in the shadows. He was already making his next move. Chapter 6, The Warning. The night air was thick with tension as Aiden walked Evelyn home. Neither of them spoke much, but their silence was filled with unspoken thoughts. Evelyn had finally told him the truth, but it was only the beginning. She was still scared. And Aiden wasn't going to let that fear control her life. When they reached her building, Evelyn hesitated at the door. "You don't have to walk me all the way up," she said softly. Aiden shook his head. "I'm not leaving until I know you're safe." She gave him a tired smile but didn't argue. They stepped into the elevator, and Aiden noticed the way she kept glancing at the mirrored walls, as if expecting someone to be watching. It made his chest tighten. When they reached her apartment, Evelyn unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Do you want to come in?" Aiden hesitated. He wanted to be there for her, to make sure she wasn't alone. But he also didn't want to make her feel like she was being watched over like a child. "I'll be right downstairs," he promised. "If anything happens, call me." She nodded, but he could tell she wasn't convinced that would be enough. Neither was he. As the door shut, Aiden lingered for a moment, listening for anything unusual. When everything seemed quiet, he turned and made his way back to the elevator. But the moment he stepped into the lobby, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Aiden's gut twisted. He hesitated for half a second before answering. "Hello." A long silence. Then, a voice, low, controlled, and dangerously calm. "You need to stay away from her." Aiden's entire body tensed. He didn't need to ask who it was. "Daniel." Aiden forced himself to stay calm. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Daniel chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I think I'm the man she belongs to." Aiden clenched his jaw. "She's not yours. She never was." "You don't know her like I do," Daniel continued, ignoring him. "You think she told you everything? That's cute. But let me make one thing very clear, Aiden, Evelyn is mine. She's always been mine. And if you keep pushing, you're going to get hurt." Aiden's grip on his phone tightened. "If you come near her again, I swear." "You'll what?" Daniel interrupted, his voice dripping with amusement. "Be careful, Aiden. You have no idea what you're stepping into." Then, the line went dead. Aiden lowered his phone, his pulse hammering in his ears. Daniel wasn't just watching Evelyn. He was watching him, too. Aiden turned on his heel and headed straight back upstairs. He wasn't going to let this man scare him. But as he knocked on Evelyn's door, he realized something that made his stomach drop. Daniel wasn't afraid of being caught. He wanted Aiden to know he was coming. And that meant things were about to get a lot worse. Chapter 7, The Fear Settles In. Evelyn opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for him. The moment she saw Aiden's face, her expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Aiden? What's wrong?" He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "He called me." Evelyn froze. "Daniel?" Aiden nodded, his jaw clenched. "He told me to stay away from you." Her breath hitched, and she took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself. "Oh God." Aiden reached out, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "Hey, look at me." She did, her eyes filled with fear. "We're not letting him control us. He wants to scare us, make us panic. We're not giving him that power." Evelyn swallowed hard. "You don't know him, Aiden. He doesn't just make threats, he follows through." "Then we stop him before he gets the chance," Aiden said firmly. "Have you gone to the police?" She let out a hollow laugh. "I tried. Months ago. They told me there was nothing they could do unless he actually hurt me. And even then, a restraining order wouldn't stop him." Aiden exhaled sharply, frustration boiling in his chest. He hated feeling powerless, but he refused to accept that there was no way to protect her. "Then we get evidence," he said. "We catch him in the act. If he's following you, if he's threatening you, there has to be a way to prove it." Evelyn bit her lip, considering his words. I don't know if I can go through all of this again. You won't be alone this time, Aiden promised. We do this together. She stared at him, searching his face for something. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay. Aiden felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. First thing tomorrow, we figure out our next move, he said. For now, you should rest. Evelyn hesitated, then took a deep breath. Will you stay? Just for a little while. Aiden nodded without a second thought. Of course. They sat on the couch, the silence between them comfortable but heavy. Evelyn curled up beside him, her fingers gripping his sleeve as if she was afraid he would disappear. Aiden didn't move. He just held her, keeping her close, silently vowing that no matter what Daniel had planned, he wasn't going to let him win. But outside, in the darkness, someone was watching. And the game was only just beginning. Chapter 8, The Game Begins. Aiden barely slept. He stayed on Evelyn's couch, every sound in the apartment building making his senses go on high alert. He wasn't paranoid, he was prepared. Because if Daniel had the audacity to call him, it meant he wasn't done. He was just getting started. Morning came too soon, and Aiden awoke to the smell of coffee. Evelyn was in the kitchen, standing by the window, her expression distant. She held her mug with both hands, staring outside as if expecting Daniel to be standing there. Aiden sat up. Anything? She flinched at his voice but shook her head. No. Just my own mind playing tricks on me. He got up and joined her, placing a hand on her lower back. We're going to figure this out. Together. Evelyn gave him a small, tired smile, but Aiden could see the exhaustion in her eyes. This wasn't just about fear. It was about years of living under someone else's control, and the realization that no matter how far she ran, Daniel was always a step behind. Aiden wasn't going to let that continue. They spent the morning setting up a plan. Step 1, gather evidence. Aiden suggested installing security cameras around her apartment and a GPS tracker on her phone in case Daniel tried to take her. Evelyn hesitated at first, but Aiden assured her, it wasn't about controlling her. It was about keeping her safe. Step 2, draw him out. Aiden knew Daniel was watching. He wanted him to make a mistake, to show himself. So Aiden made a calculated decision. He would take Evelyn out in public, act normal, make Daniel believe that she was moving on. Because nothing would make a man like Daniel angrier than seeing the woman he thought he owned slipping through his fingers. That afternoon, they went to the cafe. Evelyn sat at the piano like she always did, but her hands trembled over the keys. Aiden sat at a table nearby, keeping his eyes on the entrance. The cafe was busy, filled with the usual crowd. But Aiden wasn't looking at them. He was searching for one person. And then, he saw him. Daniel. He was standing outside, just beyond the glass window, watching. His presence was casual, hands in his pockets, a slight smirk on his lips, but his eyes were locked on Evelyn. Aiden's fists clenched under the table. He wanted to go out there, to confront him. But no. That's what Daniel wanted. He wanted to get inside Aiden's head, make him act irrationally. So Aiden forced himself to stay calm. He pulled out his phone, snapped a quick photo of Daniel, then texted Evelyn, "Don't react. He's here." Evelyn's fingers stilled on the piano. Aiden saw her inhale deeply, her back straightening. Then, she did something that surprised him. She kept playing. Soft, haunting notes filled the cafe. Aiden watched as her hands moved fluidly across the keys, her expression unreadable. It was a small act of defiance, but Aiden knew, it was taking everything in her not to fall apart. Daniel's smirk faded. He had expected fear. Instead, she was ignoring him. Aiden saw the flicker of anger in his eyes before he turned and disappeared into the crowd. The game had officially begun. When they got back to Evelyn's apartment, she sank onto the couch, exhaling shakily. I didn't look at him. I didn't let him see me scared. Aiden sat beside her. You were perfect. She let out a small laugh, but it sounded hollow. He's not going to stop, is he? Aiden clenched his jaw. No. But neither are we. Evelyn met his gaze, something unreadable in her eyes. Aiden, why are you doing this? Why are you risking so much for me? He didn't hesitate. Because I care about you. And I won't let him take that away. Silence filled the room. Then, Evelyn leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. Aiden wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. He didn't know what Daniel's next move was. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Chapter 9, The Breaking Point. The night was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Aiden sat by Evelyn's window, watching the street below. He had been staring into the darkness for hours, his mind running through every possible scenario. Daniel was close. Aiden could feel it. Evelyn had fallen asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally winning over her anxiety. Aiden had insisted she rest, but his own body refused to let him do the same. He was wired, alert, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, it did. A soft tap, tap, tap against the window. Aiden's entire body went rigid. Slowly, he turned his head. His breath caught in his throat. A piece of paper was taped to the outside of the glass. Careful not to wake Evelyn, Aiden stood up and peeled it off. His fingers tightened as he read the message, written in bold, sharp letters. You should have listened. Now, she pays the price. Aiden's pulse hammered. He whipped around, scanning the room, his instincts screaming. How had Daniel gotten that close? How had he managed to do this without making a sound? Aiden grabbed his phone and checked the security footage. His stomach twisted. The cameras outside had all been disabled. The screen was black. Daniel had been here. He turned back toward Evelyn, still asleep on the couch, unaware of the warning taped to the window. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a promise. Evelyn stirred at sunrise, stretching as she sat up. Aiden. He was already dressed, standing by the window with the note in his hand. He turned to her, his face unreadable. We have a problem. She frowned. What? He handed her the note. Evelyn's face paled. Her hands trembled as she read the words over and over again, as if willing them to change. He was here, she whispered. Aiden nodded. Last night. He took out the security cameras. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, her breathing shallow. Oh my God. Aiden knelt in front of her, taking her shaking hands in his. We're not running. We're not hiding. We end this. Now. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with fear. How? Aiden's jaw clenched. We make him think he's won. Step 1 of the plan was simple, set the trap. Aiden convinced Evelyn to call Daniel. She had been hesitant, terrified, even, but Aiden assured her that this was the only way to take back control. The phone rang 3 times before Daniel answered. Evelyn, he breathed, his voice disturbingly soft. I knew you'd call. Evelyn swallowed hard. I don't want to fight anymore. Aiden watched as her fingers curled into fists. He could see how much this was killing her, but she pressed on. I was scared, she continued. I let other people get inside my head. But the truth is, I miss you. Aiden's stomach twisted at the lie, but it had to sound real. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then, a dark chuckle. That's my girl. Aidan forced himself to stay still. You were always mine, Evelyn, Daniel continued. You just forgot for a little while. Evelyn closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. Can we talk? In person? Another pause. Then, Daniel spoke, his voice laced with amusement. I was hoping you'd say that. He gave her an address. Then, the call ended. Evelyn dropped the phone and pressed her hands to her face. I feel sick. Aidan placed a reassuring hand on her back. I know. But you did it. She turned to him, desperation in her eyes. What if this doesn't work? What if he? Aidan cut her off gently. He won't get the chance. Because this time, Aidan wasn't just playing defense. He was going to end this. That night, Aidan and Evelyn arrived at the meeting place, a dimly lit parking garage on the outskirts of town. It was the perfect setting for Daniel's twisted mind. Aidan had backup. He had called in favors, set up hidden cameras, and made sure that, this time, they would have enough evidence to bury Daniel. Evelyn stood beside Aidan, her hands clenched at her sides. I don't see him, she whispered. He's here, Aidan murmured. Waiting. And then, the echo of footsteps. Daniel stepped out of the shadows, his expression calm but his eyes burning with possession. He wore a smug smirk as he looked at Evelyn. You came. Evelyn forced herself to nod. I want to fix this. Daniel took another step forward, but Aidan moved in front of her, his stance firm. Not another step. Daniel's eyes flicked to him, his smirk widening. Ah, the knight in shining armor. Do you really think you can protect her? Aidan met his gaze, his voice deadly calm. I don't think. I know. Daniel tilted his head, as if considering. Then, without warning, he lunged. But Aidan was ready. A swift punch connected with Daniel's jaw, sending him stumbling back. He recovered quickly, rage flashing in his eyes. You think you're better than me? I don't need to be better, Aidan said coldly. I just need to end this. Police sirens blared in the distance. Daniel's smirk faltered. Checkmate, Aidan muttered. Seconds later, flashing red and blue lights surrounded them. Officers poured in, guns raised. Daniel's jaw tightened as he slowly raised his hands. This isn't over, he hissed. Aidan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Yes, it is. The officers grabbed Daniel, forcing him to the ground. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, her whole body trembling. Aidan immediately pulled her into his arms. It's over, he whispered. You're free. Tears slid down her cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, they weren't from fear. They were from relief. But somewhere, in the depths of his mind, Aidan knew. People like Daniel didn't disappear so easily. And this story wasn't over just yet. Chapter 10, Shadows Never Fade. The courtroom was silent. Evelyn sat in the front row, her fingers laced tightly together, her knuckles white. Aidan sat beside her, his presence solid and unwavering. Across the room, behind a cold metal barrier, Daniel sat in an orange jumpsuit, his expression unreadable. The trial had been swift. The evidence was overwhelming, security footage, phone recordings, and Evelyn's testimony had sealed his fate. The judge's verdict was clear. Guilty. Aidan had expected to feel relief. But as he watched Daniel being led away, something about his expression unsettled him. Daniel wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was smiling. And that smile sent a cold shiver down Aidan's spine. Weeks passed. Evelyn tried to return to normalcy. She played at the cafe again, her music lighter, freer. The weight that had once burdened her seemed to lessen with each passing day. Aidan stayed close. Even though Daniel was locked away, something deep inside him refused to let his guard down. Evelyn noticed. You don't have to protect me anymore, she told him one evening, as they sat on her balcony. It's over. Aidan forced a smile. Yeah. But he wasn't sure he believed it. Then, one night, the call came. Aidan's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Groggy, he reached for it. Unknown number. His stomach tightened. He almost didn't answer. But something told him he had to. He pressed the phone to his ear. Who is this? Silence. Then, a familiar voice. Low. Calm. Amused. Miss me? Aidan's blood ran cold. No. It wasn't possible. Daniel was in prison. And yet, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Aidan shot up from bed, his heart hammering. Where are you? He demanded. A soft chuckle. That's the fun part, isn't it? The line went dead. Aidan stared at the phone, his breath shallow. He turned to Evelyn, still peacefully asleep beside him. She had no idea. No idea that the nightmare they had fought so hard to escape had only just begun. The end. Or is it? Before you go, take action. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to like this video to show your support. Comment below and let me know your thoughts. What do you think happens next? And most importantly, subscribe so you never miss out on thrilling stories like this. Your support helps bring more intense, emotional, and suspenseful tales to life. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new story drops.